Welcome to the Digital Agency Growth Podcast. I'm your host, Dan Englander. Kim, great to have you on the show.
Thank you so much. I'm delighted to be here.
Yeah, and before I threw on the recorder, I was talking about how I had the pleasure of joining PR Council last week, which is really interesting. Got to talk about kind of what you guys are up to there. Before we get into, all the things you're seeing, because your finger's definitely on the pulse, can you talk a little bit about your background in the agency space and how you got here?
Sure. I call myself an agency animal. I have spent my entire career in agencies, mostly agencies of all sizes, but I spent a big chunk of my career at the PR firm Ketchum. And then I started an agency under the Omnicom umbrella, ran that for a decade, and then worked my way over to here, the PR Council. We are the trade association for US PR agencies, and we represent the largest PR agencies in the world, like Weber, Shandwick, and Edelman, down to businesses that are just $1 million in revenue.
That's great. A very, very succinct intro. So to get into that a little bit, can you talk about kind of the early days, kind of getting your start in the agency space and maybe how things have changed now? Like, what are you seeing with your clients that's the same or different from when you were on the agency side yourself?
Sure. Well, I'm at an advanced age. So I spent my early days of my career photocopying clips. And it's funny as everyone's hemming and hawing about AI and is that going to do away with jobs, to have been there for the digital revolution in our PR firms and understand that that didn't take away jobs. It made jobs much more interesting. And I think AI is going to do the same thing. I think there's a lot that's the same with clients and a lot that's different. I mean, just the speed of the business today is mind blowing. But I think one of the things that's super exciting in the space I serve, public relations, is how we have integrated other marketing capabilities and really pulled in data and analytics. So we're able to measure much more effectively what we're delivering for clients, whereas it used to be a lot of focus on outputs. It's shifted to outcomes, and there's still some people counting impressions, but I think it's fading across the industry, which is great.
This might be kind of a dumb question, but how do you define PR these days? Like, what are the limits of it? What is the definition of it in your book?
It's so funny. This is a conversation we have with the board at least once a year because they want to discuss why we call ourselves the PR Council, because the agencies are doing so many other things. But we look at our membership as agencies that have earned at the core. So the creative is designed to drive earned visibility, not paid, though paid is a capability offered by a lot of our agencies. It's, in fact, a fast growing capability and a place where a lot of our agencies are making their money. But we always talk about earned first or earned at the core.
That makes a lot of sense. And what's the day-to-day like for one of your typical clients? Which I guess is kind of a hard thing to ask because it sounds like you have clients all across the board. But for thinking kind of at the boutique size, are they still pitching stories to journalists and doing that game? Or if not, what does it look like?
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends on the sector to some degree. I mean, earned media coverage is still key in travel and tourism. It's really driving a lot of business, and it's easy to see those links to coverage. Some of our clients are much more in content management and content marketing and using that to drive leads for the business. I think our agencies function more and more like a ad agency. I think the difference in most PR agencies still is we don't have like pure account managers. Our account managers are schooled in PR. They're thinking multi-stakeholder, they're thinking media slash earned, not just managing that integrated work, setting strategy, delivering against plans, but they've also got to do it with an eye on these other pieces that seem a little bit unique in the PR space.
Yeah, that makes sense. And kind of PR as a space, how would you, if you're looking at the graph, is it a growing space? Have the number of agencies expanded? And with that, kind of where do you see it going in the next few years?
Yeah, I mean, we have seen incredible growth in PR agencies. I mean, coming out of the first few months of COVID, there was a huge demand for public relations. And it was a moment, my entire career, PR people have been hand wringing about wanting a seat at the table. That was a moment where PR had a seat at every table. There were so many business issues, employee issues, and I think PR was really able to deliver at that moment and retain that. So we saw 20+% growth for agencies. 2020, 2021 started trailing off just a little bit, back half of 2022. This has been a more challenging year. I think most of our agencies are seeing single digit growth, maybe even mid single digit. I think we're optimistic for things to bounce back and get moving again. There's a lot of new business in the pipeline right now that's all 2024. I guess we'll see what happens with the economy.
That makes sense. And it sounds like you're kind of working with a lot of your clients in a lot of different areas, whether it's new business or operations and sort of beyond that. How are they thinking about the core deliverable of what they're doing? Like, is the model sort of retained itself in terms of the consistent retainer? Or if not, like what interesting experiments might you be seeing with in terms of like how agencies are packaging what they do?
I have been standing up talking about the billable hour is dead. It has to go away. It's killing our agencies. I mean, we created it, so we did this to ourselves, but we're just about to release a labor bill rate study, and we had amazing participation across all sizes of agencies. We last did this and looked at December 2020 data, and it's not your rate card. We're looking at bill rates that are actually in use by clients. This year, we asked for data about bill rates in use as of June 30th, 2023. The data showing overall increases in rates of 4 to 5%. And I think we all know what's happened to inflation, what's happened to salaries. It's just not sustainable. So we're really trying to help our agencies move to a model of value billing. And we think it's much more attractive to the clients too. Let's price the work based on the outcomes, not on the energy we're exerting to try to get there. I think it makes a lot of sense for both sides.
Yeah, definitely agree. And I think with that in mind, kind of tied to that, can you talk a little bit about how your clients are conducting new business and how they're getting leads, where that's typically coming from, and so on?
I think that's probably one place where PR firms have not gotten super sophisticated. We do have some firms that do a great job on lead gen. It's a development area for many more. A lot of agencies can exist on what comes across the transom, but that's a tough game, as you well know. There's ideal clients for every firm, and you have to work to go find those. So, yeah, I think waiting for the RFP to come. Actually, we'd love to see new business go away because it's so unbelievably expensive for agencies. And we do a lot of talking with other associations similar to us around the world about a better way for reviewing the right agency to do the work. And it doesn't involve all of this spec work that takes agencies time and money, but it's also expensive for the clients.
That's super interesting. Would you mind elaborating on that in terms of like if that system's broken, the usual RFP spec work process, what other systems are out there, or what else have you seen kind of work for making that better?
Yeah, I think that there's a process that a lot of agencies around the world are talking about is more looking at agencies based on qualifications and past work versus asking for spec work. And it really can lead to a great fit. Whereas the spec work, you may get lucky with the spec work, but not have the real qualifications necessary in a PR firm to deliver against all of the stakeholder needs. So if we look back at qualifications and we ask really smart questions about that, we think you can get to the right answer in a different way.
Yeah. I guess like one question is how similar do you think the process should be to hiring an individual, right? Because if you hired a person for your company, you would look at their previous experience, you'd make sure that they're good and trustworthy and competent, check references, and then you'd hire them. And sometimes there could be a test or a pilot period, but you're essentially bringing them into the company. Do you
Yeah.
think that that is comparable or something like that's
Yeah,
works for an agency? Yeah.
I think that's a really smart analogy. I mean, if you ask for a candidate to do a piece of work product for you, it's very modest. I mean, you're not going to ask for extensive work. You just want a sense. By the way, there is legislation that you have to pay for that spec work. So,
Yeah.
sure would be nice if agencies got paid for the spec work. And some clients do set aside, it's typically a small budget, but something to pay the agencies participating in a pitch that are doing spec work.
Yeah, and I sort of have like weird mixed feelings about it. I think that the way that it usually happens is through an opaque process, and that's really the problem. It's not so much that the hours being invested or the free work, it's that those are risky hours because you don't know what the decision making process is and that sort of thing. Where what we often find is like if you know exactly who, when, where, how, why somebody's making a decision, you could charge for that work, but you may decide that the cost benefits better to do it for free because maybe you'll get an edge that way. So I think that a lot of the bigger problem we see is that agencies just don't have the sales blocking and tackling down. I guess to bring hopefully brings us to a question. What are you seeing though? Like what to not make it negative, the clients of yours that are better at sales and new business, like what do you feel they're doing differently?
I think they're being super realistic about what's right for them. I mean, you and I both know
Yeah.
agencies are filled with optimists and they can look at a new business opportunity and come up with a dozen reasons why it could be right for them. But to really have a process in place where you evaluate every opportunity, I think is the smart way to go. And the number one question I think agencies need to be asking is who in the decision group is going to root for us? Like, if you don't have, you can't identify someone who's going to root for you, I don't know that it makes sense.
Right. Having the champion definitely
Right.
important. Yeah, and I wrote down something I thought of and forgot, remember to ask. So you were talking about how maybe the process is shifting to a focus more on qualifications and past work, it sounds like. With that in mind, how does that tie to niching? Like if you were thinking about agencies niching or focusing on one or a couple areas as a trend, how do you feel about that? Is that something that is you see as is increased or decreased since you've had the association and so on?
Yeah, some of the experts I talk with, and I tend to agree with them, like the world does not need another generalist agency, jack of all trades. I think clients today really are demanding expertise in their sector, whatever it is. And I think the smartest agencies are really figuring out what they're good at and building around that and having some differentiation. I mean, it's always a funny exercise when you go through agency websites, and I do this a lot given my job, but they sound a lot alike. So, really figuring out what is special about your agency and sticking with it, I think is a great thing.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it's having the courage to do that and to realize that it's not a one-way door. Like if it doesn't go well, you can probably go back again or
Yeah.
reposition and so on. Yeah.
And if you bring a growth mindset, you do have to figure out how you're going to scale the business. And so that is going to require figuring out, all right, we've developed an expertise in this. What is most like this that lets us scale? But it's like understanding what is the expertise or the secret sauce that you're bringing and being able to articulate that to your prospects.
Let's talk about the scale angle a little bit because as we know, like scaling agencies is probably one of the harder businesses to scale. It's definitely harder to scale an agency than if you made cookies or something. You would just wholesale more flour or whatever it is. How do you see agencies scaling now or looking to go about scale in a way that might have been different than X years ago, 5, 10 years ago?
Yeah, I think a lot of agencies are thinking about how they can add different capabilities and doing that in a way that sort of lets them manage the cost. So you have an opportunity to sell paid to a client. You can freelance that for a while. Then you've got to make a decision about how do you build some staff to grow that. And then, what does it take to grow it? Is it a more senior person? Do you need the doer? How can you create a model with freelance talent and hires that lets you really get in, test it, and grow? And sometimes it doesn't work, but if you've managed it well, you don't have a lot of talent losses on that. So we're seeing a lot of development and scaling in adding different capabilities. I think there's also, how do you open up your expertise to serve different types of clients that are still related? It's funny, I think a key strategy everybody wants to, make their business grow and be inflation proof is, how do I grow healthcare business? Like, I think that's like the most popular one people initially consider. And that's an expensive one. The talent's expensive there. And to build the right talent so you can win that work, that is a little tricky. But
Yeah.
agencies are doing it, right? Does that
Yeah.
sound like what you're seeing with the agencies that you're working with?
It is. I think the move towards niching is definitely increasing. I think that's kind of becoming gospel. And I think the other thing we're seeing is just more openness to alternative paths to deliver the same results, right? Whether it's, and we're doing this within our own company more as well, where it's like, okay, we could do this for you, but the value and the scalability and all the stuff that we all want for our agencies is in the wisdom and that sort of thing. And the labor is getting more and more commoditized. So that's the challenge, is how do you give the wisdom without necessarily having to give the labor? So that's one angle. I think there's a lot of other angles too. I know that Robert Rose talks a lot about this, but the New York Times is a publisher that now has an agency arm, basically, and you could just as easily flip it. And I can't think of an example now, but I know that there's agencies that are basically publishers for their space, right? And maybe they're getting sponsorship money or something like that for their healthcare weekly or something. So the lines are getting blurry, is the TLDR. Yeah.
Totally. And it's exciting, right? There's a lot of different ways you can grow the business right now.
Yeah, a lot of different ways. And I think with that, it's often, there's a lot of different things that can work, but a lot of the times, especially in the agency space, especially with small teams, you have maybe an owner, a partner, another key stakeholder that's usually shuffling back and forth to some degree between like a whole bunch of different things. Since you worked in the agency space, we have a lot of clients now. What commonalities, if any, are you seeing for the better people you're working with in terms of how they manage their time, leadership level?
Yeah. Well, I think the happiest people are not pushing paper and reviewing Excel sheets, right? I myself always love the work, and I know there are a lot of leaders who love the work. And I think finding that balance between being close to the work to keep learning as things are changing, keeping yourself super sharp, like staying in that consulting game, I think is really important. In terms of new business, we encourage our agencies to try to build a structure for sales and marketing as quickly as they can. They might part-time it, they might outsource different aspects of it, like lead gen, but to take that off their shoulders. They can't be the only person doing that. And I think the leadership within the agency is requiring more time than ever before. There's a lack of visibility because people are remote, but you still have to find ways to create disciples, right? Spread your culture, set the expectations, role model for people, make them feel known and needed.
Yeah, that's really great. And it's funny, we just did a job interview for an ops role in our company, and they asked, how do you guys focus on culture? What do you do? And I was like, it's something we're always working on. And we're always trying to get right, because we've been remote since day one. So, and we're still trying to figure it out. Is there anything that jumps out at you, like any clients that you think are handling building the culture and sort of building that camaraderie in a remote context?
I think one place that a lot of agencies have struggled is being really focused on return to office. When can we return to office? How will we return to office? All those things about getting back in the office and making their money spent on real estate worth it. But I think the smart agencies have shifted to think, put that energy against how do we create a really great remote or hybrid experience? What are the unique problems? How do we solve for them? And really sort of rethinking people management, leadership, culture to do that. But I mean, I think some level of face to face seems to be an important step for even the committed remote agencies, and putting the time into letting people create connection. I think it's really easy in an agency to get super busy and forget how important those things are.
Yeah, definitely agree. I think with everything, there's always like cost benefit as well, because then there's office space, there's the friction of commutes, there's accessing talent on all ends of the globe as opposed to talent in your backyard, all that sort of thing. And it's funny, I think me and probably a lot of other people were pretty credulous with the COVID environment, and we're like, and we've always been remote, so we're like, great, everyone's going to become like us. And then a lot of other people were like, hey, this is here to stay and all this stuff. And my wife's in the financial space, and they're already like back basically, and they're
Yeah.
not happy about it, but they're all like they got pulled back to the office at this point. So it's pretty much boomeranged in a lot of areas. I guess where do you see it going in the agency space if we're talking like, hey, I know this is an annoying predict the future type question, but if we're talking a year or two out, do you see everybody back in office? Do you see hybrid? What do things look like?
I think hybrid is going to last a long time. What I think is confusing for employees, like if you want your employees back and you believe that's critical to what you deliver to clients, then I do think that you have to make a strong statement on that and sort of mandate, though nobody likes mandating anything in an agency. But I think if you say, we'd like for you to be back 2 days a week, there's a lot of ambiguity there. And you, the leaders, are most likely going to be frustrated that people aren't coming back just because you'd like for them to. And they probably feel a little bit insecure about, well, what does this mean for my career? Should I go? Do I not go? I think you really have to decide what you're willing to mandate. And I think agencies are afraid to mandate, a lot of them, particularly the larger ones. I think it's been easier for some of the mid-size and smaller firms, but really challenging for the large agencies to mandate.
Yeah, and my hunch is that it kind of originates from Silicon Valley, from that culture, and kind of trickles down because it reminds me of these giant tech companies that would have the infinite vacation policies or whatever, and then
Yeah.
but it doesn't ever come out like that. It comes out with just a culture developing on its own that could be pretty negative of people never taking vacation because you don't have a mandate, you don't have a rule that gives people the
Yeah.
flexibility. Yeah.
I mean, one of the things that I'm super passionate about is the need to diversify our industry and make it more inclusive. I really think if leaders aren't focused on that, they're in trouble down the road. I mean, our younger talent expects that, demands that. Our clients need expertise in the constituents they're trying to sell to. And I think that should be a consideration in how you work. I know we've talked a lot and heard a lot about how some underrepresented talent doesn't want to go back to the office and be subjected to bias and feel left out and all of these things. But I don't think the solution is that we just leave everybody remote. The solution is we figure out how to be inclusive, and maybe we can be super inclusive remotely and we can eliminate bias remotely. But I think those are the problems we have to solve. And just saying, oh, well, be remote or be hybrid because that is easier on our underrepresented talent, that doesn't seem like the right answer to me.
Yeah, and it's tough to have a situation where somebody that's remote and somebody that's in person are treated in the same way, because it's just really hard to do that if you're working alongside somebody every day and then there's somebody else that's on the periphery, you don't see them as much. So there's not one right answer. I think it's kind of a tough thing to juggle. To shift gears a little bit, I know you're doing lots of surveying, which is super interesting. I got a little window into that the other day. Can you talk about what you're seeing out there? And is there anything that surprised you from survey results recently?
Let's see. We heard anecdotally that by mid-August, a lot of firms were seeing an uptick in business, particularly new business. I think it's probably more modest of an uptick now that we've surveyed a few different groups. I think it's a little bit more modest than we'd hoped, but there is business in the pipeline. It's for 24 right now. It's not going to have an impact on 23, but I think everybody's shifted their focus to let's focus on getting the revenue lined up for 24. What else are we seeing in our polls? Lots of focus on AI, lots of effort to lead the clients on that. And I do think clients are turning to agencies to help them figure out how to incorporate it and to make very smart decisions within their own organizations about how their agencies will use AI, how they'll protect the client and the agency from any legal risk. We're seeing a lot of client issues. I mean, payment terms are all over the place. We're talking a lot about what is a reasonable payment term for agencies that pay their talent every 2 weeks and how you might negotiate around that. What else? Non-payment is a big issue right now, and slow decision making. And slow decision making has a couple of pain points with agencies. Sometimes new business is being won, but the start date keeps getting delayed and delayed and delayed. But the client wants the team they bought in the room, but agencies don't have teams just sitting around waiting for clients to be ready to go. So that's been an issue. Sometimes this slow decision making means that once a decision gets made, the deadline hasn't moved, even though the decision moved. And agencies really should be charging rush charges for that kind of situation because they've got to figure out getting the work done in that time frame. Those are just some of the sort of business issues that we're talking a lot about.
Yeah, and that sparks a lot of different ideas, and I think that in a lot of other industries, to get people to move forward, you'll see in the consumer space, you'll see scarcity being used, like act now or
Yeah.
get a discount or whatever. It doesn't really work in the B2B consultative agency space because it just sort of erodes trust and it looks not classy. But I think real scarcity does work. It does move things along, right? So for example, do you want the team that sold you the thing? Well, we need to get started by this date. Any interesting tactical stuff you're seeing out there?
Well, that is definitely one that's working. Not being outrageous about it, but we cannot hold this team longer than 30 days. I mean, we heard of an agency today that's saying, listen, you have right of first refusal, but I've got another new business client that wants this team. You have 5 days to make a decision. That might work for some, but you're right. I think that scarcity is really the only pull on it.
So as long as it's real and it's honest, then it is what it is. So I think that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, this has been great. What's new? Like, what do you have coming up at PR Council? What are you excited about?
Definitely all the work on AI. And I really am excited about the opportunities for value billing. And I truly believe it's a win-win for agencies and clients. Doesn't mean you're not going to have to log your billable time, but to be paid for the results we generate, I think is pretty amazing, a great opportunity for firms. And I think sometimes agency, particularly in PR agencies, I can really only speak to that because that's my whole career. Sometimes I think PR people don't think like business people. They want to serve clients, which is wonderful, but I'm really excited about being a business person and helping grow businesses. And I think if we can get more of our talent to get that religion and get really excited about the opportunities with value pricing, I think that's going to be really rewarding and lucrative.
Yeah, definitely agree, and kind of excited to see what you and everybody at PR Council develops there. So hopefully we'll have you back on before long. And where can people go to follow what you're up to and get in touch and all that good stuff?
Yeah, checking out our website, prcouncil.net is a great place to go. We're regularly publishing updates on LinkedIn as well. And, happy to share intelligence and help grow smarter agencies.
Awesome. We'll get all that linked up. And thank you again, Ken. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much.